Hello, 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 hello. This is Willie Cartwright with From Saved to Sane. I am glad to be with you today. I am glad and thankful that I have all of you out there who are listening. And let me say hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good night, depending on when and where you are listening to us at. But we are glad to have you with us. Let me begin by first apologizing because I usually do this every other week, but I'm usually consistent with it. I have a good a good reason for why I missed last week because we were supposed to be on last week as opposed to this week. But last week I wasn't thinking. And last week during this time, last Wednesday was my 20th anniversary. So my wife and I celebrated 20 years of being married and 21 years of being together on last Wednesday. And so when I scheduled out the podcast, I forgot that it was our anniversary. So those of you who are married, especially men, you understand. Hopefully you can understand that. But I had to sort of miss and push it back to this week. Fortunately, I was able to do it this week because tomorrow is actually my birthday, and so we have plans for that as well. But today we are good. So again, I apologize for missing last week due to our anniversary, my 20th anniversary, my lovely wife and I. So we celebrated 20 years, so we're good. I tell her she's locked in; she can't go anywhere. Um, so again, thank you to all of you who are joining us, and who will join us, and who will listen to this at a later time and a later day. But I want to begin, as I always do, by saying thank you to a couple of people, beginning with Taisha Essick, who's out there somewhere in space listening. Hope that you are doing well, Taisha, you and the family. You guys need to make a trip out here to Vegas so we can hook up and get together and talk about things, and we can finally meet your significant other, your husband, in person. Also, thank you again to my wife, as I mentioned her earlier regarding our anniversary, our 20th anniversary. But I'd like to say thank you to her for her support and everything that she's done for us and what she continues to do for this podcast. Um, Before I get started, again, let me make sure I promote my book, From Saved to Sane: My Journey Away from Christianity and Why Christianity Has Been Detrimental to the African American Community. Willie O. Cartwright. You can get this book on Amazon, or you can email me at wocartwright at Yahoo, CARTWRIGHT at Yahoo, WO Cartwright at Yahoo. If you want a signed copy, email me, send me your address. I'll send you my cash out, 19.99 for a signed copy of the book, and we'll get it out to you. So again, that is my book, From Saved to Sane. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of you who have supported me on this journey from the time that I wrote this book and published it. I think it was around 2000, 2002, was it? Somewhere between that time. The years are running together, especially with COVID and all of that. Um, so again, thank you all for joining us. Certainly appreciate that you are here. If you are listening, please send us a text, a message. Let us know that you're listening. Say hello, ask a question, make a comment. You don't have to necessarily be pro what we're talking about. It could be con. You may not agree with everything that I say, and I certainly welcome that. I welcome disagreement because I think that it presents an opportunity for all of us to learn. I'm certainly not a know-it-all. I certainly don't know it all about this topic. I am fairly well versed in this topic, but certainly don't know everything, and so I'm always open to learn. And so I certainly appreciate those of you if you have something of substance to add. And so thank you for that. Let's see who there. Nice Black Bruh 82. Good evening to you. Appreciate it. I don't know if this is your first time. I don't. That name does not seem familiar, but if it is your first time, welcome. Glad to have you here. Tell all your friends. Tell your enemies. If this is not your first time, then I'm still saying welcome today, and I'll apologize if I thought it was your first time. But thank you for joining us. Um, As I do all the time, I tell you the topic and then I give you the history or the background as to why I am discussing this. Nice Black Bro 82, let me know. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully there's not an issue with the volume. You can let me know if there is an issue with the volume or you can hear me clearly. Um, I said this is melanated. Oh, okay. Phenomenal. It's just not showing my hand. Oh, okay, okay. Glad to have you, melanated. Glad to have you. Now you are a regular, so good deal, good deal. Um, and so today's topic, five indisputable reasons why Christianity and the Abrahamic God are fraudulent. This topic sort of came about for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have been, and I might have mentioned this the last time that we were on. I have been a lot more active on a social media website called Threads. Many of you may be familiar with Threads. I am less active on Facebook. Speaking with my wife and others, we realized that Facebook is probably not the best audience for us in trying to get our message out. Threads has been a lot better for us in the standpoint of the dialogue and the conversations. I think Thread, for me, it appears that I'm getting more international feedback, people from other countries. I think the feedback is a little bit more um, intellectual in its presentation and in the way that people speak. Certainly, that's not to say that everyone who responds or who replies does it from a highly intellectual level, but there is a level of high or what would appear to be at least moderate acumen when we're talking about these topics. And so I've been on Threads. Let's see. Phenomena needs to. I'm sorry. We had a couple other people. Go fit the Black Critic. Peace, brother. Peace. Glad to have you too. Peace to you as well. Glad to have you on here. Um, Phenomena said, I need you to send this message to everybody on my job because all of them suffer from a bad case of cognitive dissonance. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So as I was saying, I've been active on Threads, and so we get into these dialogue and these engagements. And one of the things that I said earlier, maybe the beginning of this year or even late last fall, is that I wanted this podcast now, I think going into our third or fourth year, I wanted this to be more informative. I wanted to present you guys with more substantive information and less of the emotion with it. And not saying that that's what we were all about earlier, but I certainly wanted to make the concerted effort to make sure that you guys are getting more information, more facts, substantive stuff that you can use when you yourself may be engaged in dialogue with believers. And so that is one of the reasons why this topic came along. And so I've sort of hashed this out on Threads. And I saw a video not too long ago because I'm constantly reading, listening to YouTube videos and getting information and reading cited work and researched work as well. And so needless to say, there are a whole host of reasons as to why Christianity and the Abrahamic God are fraudulent. But I wanted to present to you guys five, and the reason why these particular five is because these five, and again there are others, many others, but these are some of the foundational reasons as to why I personally left Christianity and became an unabashed atheist. And so these are subjects and topics that I wrestled with, that I researched, that I wrote about, that I sought to get clarification on over the last 10 plus years. And so they became sort of the foundation as to why I am no longer a Christian after spending 40 years as a Christian, or 40 plus years as a Christian. And so, in no particular order, although I saved the last one, I guess is sort of my sort of go-to. But let's get into it. The first reason as to why um, the first undisputed reason as to why Christianity and Abraham and God are fraudulent. And when I say undisputed, What I mean is that there are facts to support this. That most sane, non-religious people who are not under the indoctrination of Christianity or any of the other Abrahamic religions can see that the points that I'm making make a whole lot of sense. And so that's what I mean by indisputed. I mean, there's evidence, there's empirical, objective, testable evidence, collaborated evidence as to what I am saying. And so let's begin. So the first one is that the Bible contradicts science. And so when we talk about science, science in itself is just individual scientists, professionals, people who study this, who go out and they seek and they search for evidence. I'm not saying, and I know there are people out there who say, well, their research method or they begin with a biased premise in some cases. But that's not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that that does not happen, but I'm saying science itself is just seeking to answer questions, and they let the evidence or they follow the evidence to wherever that evidence leads. And so when we talk about how the Bible contradicts science, I just wanted to list some of them, some of the ways. And this is just these are a very few number of ways in which the Bible contradicts science or vice versa, because there are many more ways in which the Bible and the and science are at odds. So let's begin. The first one is the age, the earth, the age of the earth. Although the Bible doesn't specifically say how old the earth is, how old it believes that the earth is. Number one, there's no dates necessary. There's no dates per se in the Bible. But if we do the research and we start from where Jesus was born to now, we know that's roughly 2,600 years. And then there's some time prior to Jesus' birth that the Bible sort of notates. And so there are points and information within the Bible, especially the Old Testament, that gives you a rough estimate, a rough age of what the Bible would think that the earth is. Also, you have young earth believers, people who are of the Christian faith, who believe, and based on their interpretation of what the Bible says, they believe that the earth is a lot younger than what it is too. So, given that information, we sort of get to the point where arrive at the age of anywhere from 6 to 8,000 years old. 10 at the max is what young Earth Christians say, and the Bible itself sort of alludes to the age of the Earth. So, anywhere between 6 and 10,000 years, depending on how you count it, depending on what you're reading. We know for a fact that science says that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, or 3.8 billion years old. And I may be off on my numbers, but at least over 3 billion years old. And so this information that science has, this is based on evidence, is based on the science, is based on methods, scientific methods of counting and understanding how old the earth is, fossils, all the other type of methods that geologists and biologists and people who are in these fields study and realize how old the earth is. So that is a major contradiction. We know for a fact that we have records, evidence of societies that existed that are a lot older than 6 or 8 or even 10,000 years old. We find fossils of older Homo sapiens as old as 250,000 years. The oldest science puts modern man, that is Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, modern man, at about 250,000 years old. So how can the Earth be 8,000 years old? And so that is one of the major contradictions between the Bible and science. Another one would be creation versus evolution. Again, sort of similar to the science of how old the Earth is. Science tells us through evolution, through the study of evolution, beginning with Big Bang, through natural selection. If you go further, further back, then there's some abiogenesis, which we won't get into, but you can study it on your own. Abiogenesis, but certainly Big Bang, natural selection, and through evolution. That stuff is chronicled. It is documented. It is evidentiary. It is evidence that present to us that evolution is indeed fact. It is indeed happening, has happened, and continue to happen. There is a macro level and a micro level, but rest assured, the science is 100% confident that there has been evolution and that we are here. We are a product of evolution. On the other hand, excuse me, the Bible says that God created earth and man and all of this in a time span of 6 days, and he rested on the seventh day. But even if you look at some of the other stuff about the creation, that does not line up with what it says in science. And so, I mean, with the science. So that takes me to the third point, which is the order of creation versus what science says is biologically impossible to deal with, to happen. So in creation, if you read the creation story, it talks about that God created plants before he created the sun, and that we had 3 or 4 days before the sun was created. So that get you so you don't have to be a critical thinker. From just a basic generic information, just thinking about it, how did we have plants before we had sunlight? Because we need sunlight in order for plants to grow, photosynthesis, and all of that. Those of you who remember science from middle school and high school, you certainly need the sun. Also, how can you count days if there is no sun? So we don't know when it's dark or when it's light if there is no sun. So what type of light did we have if the sun and the moon did not exist until the fourth day and well after we had plants? And so that is certainly contradictory to what the science says. Then there are some other things as well as we talk about these sort of in the same frame with these other things. The Bible talks about the sun standing still for an entire day, and this was going on during a war. It was supposedly in an effort. God was supposedly helping his chosen army to win a war by lengthening the days by having the sun stand still. Those of you with just a um, cursory knowledge of how these things work would know that if the sun was to ever sit still, or well, let me rephrase that, because it's not really about the sun sitting still, but if the Earth stopped rotating, stopped spinning, because that would give us that would give us the image. I mean, that would give us that would be the same thing as for us, what we would view as the sun standing still, because it's really about the Earth rotating, right? And again, this is middle school, high school science that we're talking about. If the Earth would ever stop rotating, science tells us that it would be catastrophic. We would no longer exist. Human beings, plants, animals would no longer exist as we know of today. And so we know scientifically this is impossible. And secondly, if the sun stood still, why is there zero written documentation of this event in any society's documented history? There is no society that existed during this so-called time period that documented that the sun stood still, not one, not at all. So you mean to tell me that something that this would have been the single greatest natural phenomenon to have ever happened, not only during that period, but up until today. The fact that the earth stopped rotating and made it appear that the sun was standing still. And there is no society, even a lot of these societies who kept meticulous records of everything, from the mundane to the extraordinary, that there was nothing written whatsoever about the so-called sun sitting still, or as we know it now, because we are a lot wiser, the earth stopped rotating. And so then there's things like the Bible referred to bats as birds. We know again, that bats are not birds. Bats are indeed mammals. Again, this is something that you learn, excuse me, that you learn in middle school, certainly high school, and that all of us know. And then finally, to sort of close this part out, um, remember that in the Bible, germs were believed to be a curse, were believed to be something from demons and the devil. But we know that, well, I should say sickness, but we know that now sickness is caused by certain germs, and that sickness is indeed not a curse or not something from demons. And so that's just the first. That is just the first of my five reasons as to why Christianity and the Abrahamic God are fraudulent. And so you need to think about that. Those of you out there, certainly think about those things. And again, these are practical, informative things that you can take with you when you get engage in these dialogues. And so the position of me as an atheist and most atheists that I know, and I think the overall position for atheists is that we reject the God claim due to the lack of empirical evidence, right? And so when you start dissecting that, and and believers say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, similar to what I just wrote, there is the stuff that causes many Christians to be Christians and that they rely on, it's simply not factual. The information is simply not factual. The creation story is simply not a factual story. All of the other things that I mentioned are simply not based in fact and based in reality. Let me go on. Number five, I'm sorry, the second of the five indisputable reasons why I'm no longer a Christian or why Christianity and the Abrahamic God are fraudulent is unverifiable and unproven biblical stories. And so I selected four significant biblical stories for us to discuss. The reason why I selected these four stories were because they are foundational to the very faith itself. They are foundational to the existence of this Jesus Christ character. Um, and so if these things fail, if these stories don't stand up to secular or non-biblical scrutiny, and then all of us, all of you who are still believers, should certainly be asking questions, because without these four stories being real, then your entire religion falls apart. Your entire belief system falls apart and collapses. So let's get started with this. The first one that I want to talk about was Noah's Ark. So those of you who know the story, familiar with Christianity, God created Adam and Eve, and God got upset, and at some point said, "You know what? I'm angry. These people just not acting right." So He basically threw a great flood, the great flood, destroys and kills everybody except a family of about 8, which includes Noah. Uh, Even though Noah and his family are not perfect people by any stretch of the imagination, there's other stories that we won't get into today, but certainly these are not perfect people. But the genesis of that is that this is the family who sort of supposedly restarted humanity, right? So again, if this story fails, if this story is not real, if this story is not reality, then it collapses the entire faith. And so we know for a fact, first of all, historians, there is zero evidence, historical evidence from not only secular historians, but even biblical historians, that the Noah Ark story as we know it, the Great Flood story as we know it in the Bible, is factual. There is zero evidence, and historians would tell you that they have not found any information that would lead us to believe that that story is true. That's number one. So there's no evidence whatsoever, whether it be from biblical or religious historians or secular historians. And they've tried and they've tried and they've tried. Um, Secondly, or the second part of that is that we know where this story originated from. We know that this story originated from much older religions, much older stories, similar stories like the Gilgamesh story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm saying it wrong for some reason. But we know where these stories came from. We know that they came from much older religions, and that they were sort of co-opted. I'm not going to say stolen because I'm trying to be nicer today, but they were co-opted from much older religions. If you look at, again, let's go back to the science, because again, I'm talking about this being informative, this being substantive and based on scientific information that we have. Read any science about this, phenomenon, and you will read that it did not happen because we have scientific evidence with the mountains and the sea levels and all of the other stuff, fossils and all of that, that at no time in the history of the world was the entire planet underwater. At no time. Even to the point where there's historians who are much better versed at this than I am, will tell you that it is actually impossible for the entire earth to be underwater all at the same time. Were there parts of the earth that are no longer underwater that at one time were submerged underwater? Absolutely. Um, we know that for a fact. But a worldwide flood, as the Bible indicate, there is zero evidence that that ever occurred. Here's what historians believe most likely occurred. In a lot of these regions, in a lot of these areas, the societies, the local societies, believe that they were sort of the only societies that existed, or at least them and the other societies around them that they could see, had relationships with, or whatever. They were unaware of how large the planet was, right? And so, what you had in many of these places was localized flooding. And the reason why this flood story is prevalent in almost every part of the world is because most parts of the world had some type of localized flooding that they mistook for a worldwide flood. And so you can see this is the equivalent of a fish story, right? Those of you who understand what a fish story is, those of you who've been fishing, you catch a fish, and the first time you tell the story, the fish was this big. Next time, if it was this big, by the time you tell the sixth or seventh or eighth person, the fish was a whale. And so this is sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about the story of the great flood. Localized flooding that became myth, that became part of the local religious beliefs, and that story sort of expanded and then went from where it was localized flooding to, yeah, it was a great worldwide flood. And so we know for a fact that that did not happen, did not occur. So if that didn't occur, then the whole story of Noah, which, by the way, we have no archaeological evidence of the flood. We have zero archaeological evidence of Noah and his family, all of that. So that's a problem, or should be a problem for many believers if you follow the science. Second, and one of my favorite, is the Exodus story. So again, those of you who are not familiar with the Exodus story, this is a foundational piece in the Bible, in the Christian faith. And you should be familiar with it because it's we see it every year around Easter when they talk about the Ten Commandments and that whole story. And so the Egyptian king Pharaoh is holding the Israelites, the Hebrews, as slaves. Moses is sent to plead and to get Pharaoh to release the slaves, God's chosen people. The Pharaoh says no, and through a series of tragedies that God causes to happen to Egypt, the Pharaoh gets to a point where he says, "Okay, your people can go," but here's the kicker: God decides that no, that He wants to be psychotic, and He hardens Pharaoh's heart, so that Pharaoh does not agree to let the people go. And then the final plague or curse or whatever is the killing by God of all of the firstborn in Egypt. Now, what did all of those people do wrong? Why didn't God just kill Pharaoh or whatever, or allow Pharaoh to change his mind? That's a whole nother story that we'll get into. And so the Exodus uh, is the people, the Hebrews, the Israelites leaving or exiting Egypt, going across into Judea or Jerusalem, whatever they're going, right? That's the Exodus story. Again, if we take a scientific approach and if we review and research all of the information, all the writing that is done on the Exodus, again, from non-biblical, non-Christian, non-religious historians, to also include religious, Christian, and Jewish historians, there is zero evidence that this Exodus ever happened. So let's look at the numbers. We know, according to the Bible or whatever, I think it's the Bible source, or whatever. We're talking about at least 600,000 slaves. And then if you count, there's numbers out there. You can do the research. If you add family members, kids, and all of that, we're talking close to about 2 million people who supposedly left Egypt and exited Egypt into the so-called Promised Land, right? The problem with that is twofold. Number one, there is zero documentation anywhere in Egypt about this Exodus. So you mean to tell me a advanced society like Egypt, who certainly kept meticulous records, wrote down everything, did not mention that 2 million, up to 2 million people, slaves left? That is practically impossible to have happened and not to be documented. So there's zero documentation of any of this anywhere in Egypt. Secondly, when historians study and look for archaeological artifacts, even in the bottom of the Red Sea, because the Hebrews and the Israelites supposedly crossed the Red Sea. Those of you who remember the movie The Ten Commandments, Moses is standing there, and he parts the Red Sea, and the people supposed to go across the Red Sea. And then as the Egyptian soldiers are attempting to go in chariots and horses and everything else to chase after them, the water comes back, the Red Sea comes back together and drowns all of them. Clearly that would be easy to find evidence of, and scientists and historians and everybody, they've done exhaustive searches the bottom of the Red Sea and come up completely empty of any sort of evidence that would signify or collaborate this biblical story. And so we know that this did not happen. But again, this is foundational to the faith. This is foundational to Christianity. This is foundational to Jesus and his divinity. But none of this happened. The third one that I'd like to talk about as part of this second reason is the Adam and Eve story. This is the beginning. This is the genesis of everything, of it all. God supposedly created a man out of dust and then created a woman from his rib. And they are supposed to be the beginning of human life. And then you get the whole first sin because they listened to the snake, the serpent. They ate the forbidden fruit on the tree of good and bad, good and evil, or the tree of knowledge, depending on how you read it and where it's from. And God, because of that, cursed everyone that is ever will be born after that point. We are born as sinners, which is a asinine position to take and position to believe in. We have never seen a person not born of a woman ever. Scientifically, it is impossible, and we've never seen it. Also, science would tell you that there's never been a time in our existence as human beings where it was just two people that existed. My reading and my research, I've heard everywhere from the minimum that we've ever had, the number of humans, modern humans on Earth, is anywhere from 1,200 to 2,500 being the minimum. And so Again, scientifically, that is not plausible. That is not possible. And so, as the foundational story in the Bible and Christianity, and and the only reason for this Jesus coming, died, being crucified, and resurrected, if this Adam and Eve story is not real, then that would have been no reason for Jesus to come back, be crucified, and so-called resurrected, because the purpose of that is because Adam and Eve sinned, and we all were punished before we were even thought about, even created. And so the purpose of Jesus coming back was to allow us to be able to get over that sin and get through that sin and still spend time in heaven with God. Which again, if you really break it down, makes zero sense whatsoever. But if that story is not true, then that certainly throws a monkey wrench in the whole Jesus resurrection story and all of that. And then finally, the last point about this particular section is the resurrection itself, right? Supposedly Jesus Christ was crucified. I understand that in Rome back then, crucifixion was a normal way of executing people. But Jesus was supposed to be crucified, and then 3 days later, rose from the dead. Um, and so we have zero non-biblical collaborated evidence of any type of resurrection. This would indeed be a supernatural event, making a marking the divinity of Jesus. There is zero evidence of this ever happening. Um, all of the so-called evidence that we have is through the Bible, and even those stories are contradictory, depending on which one of the Gospels you read, who saw Jesus first, who reported, who didn't report, what was said at the end on the cross by the other two people who were also being crucified. All of that, it is highly contradictory. There's a lot of contradictions throughout the Gospels about this particular event. Again, there is zero evidence that this happened. Science would tell you that this is impossible. We've never had anyone to die, be clinically dead, and buried for 3 days that came back. Um, the empty tomb, quote unquote, is evidence. It's not evidence. Nothing in the Bible is evidence if it's not corroborated by an outside source, a contemporaneous outside source, meaning a contemporary outside source, someone, someplace, somehow documenting these things as they occurred, and not 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, 100 years later through hearsay, all of that. So if any of these stories are proven to be, and they have been, any of these stories are false, then it sort of destroys. It will destroy. It absolutely destroys all of Christianity and Jesus Christ as a divine figure. But you take all four of these, just these four stories together, and it certainly proves that Christianity, the Abrahamic God, are certainly fraudulent. The next one I want to talk about is Jesus as the archetype, or the archetype for Jesus. So what do I mean by that? Many of you may have heard that the whole Jesus story, the date of his date of birth, being born of a God, dying and rising again, is not the first, it's not the original, and it's not unique to Christianity. Well, that is absolutely true. Um, the Jesus figure, the Jesus character, the divine character, all of that is sort of an archetype for other religions. Many of these religions predate Christianity. And so their main characters, their God, are very similar, or we should say Jesus is very similar in who he is, how he came to be, how he lived his life, and major events that point to his divinity is very similar to what we see in much older religions. Um, Again, this God being born of a virgin, the union of a virgin and a God and another God, um, being died and resurrected, performing miracles. birthday being on December the 25th, which is the winter solstice, and another celebration. That's why that's a popular date. Um, and so some of the and so I tell you this stuff. I'm going to give you the names of some gods who the Jesus character mimics, and you can do the research for yourself. So again, this is informative. So we look at gods like Osiris, Egyptian god; Horus, another Egyptian god; um, uh, Dionysus, um, Mithras, Krishna, who's a Hindu god; Attis, that's Attis; Adonis, Hercules, uh, Zoroaster, who the Zoroastrian religion is actually a partial precursor to Judaism, and of course Judaism is a precursor to Christianity, and so many of the ideas and things that we have through Christianity and Judaism first originated through Zoroastrian, that religion, right? And so these are just a list of, I think here we're about eight, um, but there are as many as 16 now. Now, some of these are, there's some dispute to everything. You can certainly find individuals who would vehemently defend um, the Jesus Christ archetype character against these. You can certainly find people who would say, well, for example, Osiris, yeah, he may have been a guy. He was, born December 25th, um, died and resurrected, but some of the other stuff doesn't line up. And you can find this in all of them. However, it is too much of a coincidence for all of these gods to have those many things similar. And it's more than just the things that I named. I mean, it's the 12 disciples and it's some of the other stuff. It is more than a coincidence that these gods have these things in common. And so, what historians and people who study this stuff have said is that it's clearly that these religions borrowed from one another, especially in the same general regions, and they borrowed from one another in creating their religion and in creating their God. And Christianity and Jesus Christ is no different. Um, Christianity and Jesus Christ just did a much better marketing job because of a couple of things: Constantine and Rome being one, the printing press being two, and war and violence being three. And so that is why Christianity and Jesus Christ had stood the test of time. And it is not about it being a more valid religion than some of the others. So again, do your research. Osiris, Horus, Dionysus, Mithras, Krishna, Hercules, Zoroaster, Zoroaster, and Adonis, among many, many more. There are books out there, and I should have bought one to talk about, but there are certainly books out there that talk about all of these dying and rising gods who, again, predated Jesus Christ. And so it's something that we should talk about. Again, as a Christian, all of these things should be sending bells off in your head. If you've never been exposed to any of this, if you've never heard about any of this, certainly do your research. Don't take my word for it. But again, these are some of the reasons, the major reasons, the main reasons why I am no longer a Christian, because it just didn't make sense. Things just did not line up for me. And there were just too many questions and too many holes for me. The fourth group, or the fourth thing was, and these last two I think are major. Not like the other ones were not, but certainly of these. There's no contemporaneous evidence of the resurrection. Um, I want y'all to listen to this clearly. We talk about Pontius Pilate uh, in Rome, who crucified Jesus, and there is record of a Pontius Pilate person who existed, right? And we know that the Romans kept meticulous records of this. Even when Jesus supposedly resurrected, there is zero documentation. Rome, Samaria, Egypt, any society, civilization in that area wrote about a God, divine figure rising from the dead and living again. It would have been, and it would be the singular most extraordinary event to ever happen in the existence of human mankind, period. And for no society, no writer, and keep in mind also during this time that Jesus Christ supposedly lived, died, and resurrected, there were a minimum at least 200 historians, writers who documented everything from, again, from the mundane to the extraordinary, who wrote. And no one, even Rome, Egypt, these places that you would just imagine would certainly write about the risen divine God or Jesus at this point. There is zero contemporaneous writings, documentation of this event ever happening. The only information that you get, the only place that you can find information as to this event happening is the Bible, right? And then there's also clearly obviously there's questions about when this was written, why it was written, how it was written. But using the Bible as evidence of the resurrection, and I use this analogy a lot. It's like me telling you at my age, telling you that I can run a 3-minute mile, right? It is an extraordinary claim that we have not seen from someone my age. I don't think we've seen it all at all. I know there are sub 4-minute miles. I don't know if there's been a 3-minute mile. Uh, but that would be akin to me telling you that I ran a 3-minute mile. If you don't believe me, ask me. And I provide the only evidence. So using the Bible as evidence for the resurrection is akin to that. And if your eternal life depended on it, you would want independent, objective, testable corroboration of the fact that I can run a 3-minute mile, right? Whether it was recorded by someone or you actually watch me do it, you would want some kind of objective, corroborated evidence that what I'm saying is true. And so it is the Jesus claim, the resurrection claim. It is the most extraordinary claim that we have as human beings. Thus, being it requires the most amount of information and evidence if we are to believe this. And finally, number 8, and again, I want you to listen to this, to what I'm saying. There is, and this goes back. So let me preface this. I am not saying, because I know people are going to listen to this later and say, "Well, you said da da da." I am not saying that Jesus Christ, the human person, the human being, did not exist. And let me make this clear. Most historians believe that a human man depicting the character and the characteristics of the human Jesus, probably existed. What they don't agree on and what they disagree and what has not been proven and what can't be proven is that this person was divine. So with me saying that, listen to this clearly though. There is zero contemporaneous evidence of Jesus Christ, period. Not just the divine, but the human Jesus Christ. So what does that mean? That means that the 33 years that Jesus Christ supposedly existed on earth, there is no documentation of his existence that was documented during the time that he lived. Zero. Absolutely zero. Now, I can understand that clearly not there's millions of people or whatever who live that there's no documentation of, right? But if you are a person who others are claiming to be the Son of God, the Messiah, and you perform the miracles that the Bible attribute to him, and Rome crucified him for these very things, there is no way that you're going to have the number of historians, the number of societies and cultures who took meticulous record and had meticulous record keeping, that no one wrote about this man walking down the street, raising the dead, excuse me, raising the dead, feeding the hungry, performing miracles. There is no way that someone didn't record this stuff as it was occurring. Not Rome, not Egypt, not Judea, not Nazareth, none of these places. No one, nobody, zero zip. The earliest writings that we have about Jesus actually come from Paul, 20 to 30 years after Jesus supposedly died. The earliest Gospels, being Mark, I think, was probably 40, 50 years later. But even with Paul being the earliest writers about Jesus, Paul never wrote about the human being Jesus. Most of Paul's writing was mystical. It was because he said this, that all of his ideas about Jesus he got through a dream. And so we don't get anything about Jesus' life until 40, 50 years later from Mark, and then the other gospel writers, or the other names that was attributed to the gospels, because these are not the actual writers of the gospels. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John is just names that were attributed to them by that. And that's a whole nother story. And so, to me, the strongest evidence against, certainly against the divinity of Jesus, but I even question the actual existence of Jesus as a human being. I'm not saying that I don't believe it, and I'm not going against what many historians believe, but I'm saying that there is an area, it is something that can be questioned because of what I just said about the lack of contemporaneous evidence for Jesus Christ. So those are my major points. I mean, there are many other reasons why, but I do this also because I also try to make it clear to believers when we have these dialogues and these discussions. One of the things that believers like to fall back upon is that where you're no longer a Christian because you were hurt in the church, or you're no longer a Christian, or you no longer believe in God because something happened to you. And what I tell them is that the real reason that many non-Christians become atheists is not because of church hurt or an event or whatever. It's because of the things that I just named. What church hurt do for a lot of people, it causes them to pause, take a step back, and start asking harder questions, or start demanding answers for the questions that they've already asked. And when they don't get answers to those questions, they begin at that point to start doing the research. And the research is what leads them to this. And then they say, oh, light bulb goes off. There is no there are no empirical reasons, no evidentiary reasons why I should continue to believe in this mythology that we call Christianity, God and Jesus, the divine. And so that's another reason why we did this, because I always want to make this clear to non-believers that it has absolutely nothing to do with church hurt or whatever. I simply no longer believe in God or Jesus or any other God or deity for that matter. I am an atheist for the mere fact that there is zero empirical evidence that sways me to continue to believe that this God or Jesus, at least in the divine sense, are actual are real. And so that's pretty much what I have for today. I don't see any questions or any comments other than what I read earlier. Again, all of you are you can leave questions, leave comments. Certainly, I'll go back and go back through this and look at any comments that may have been left and see if I can try to. And I will certainly try to answer all of those. But other than that, this is what I had. I hope that this was informative. I hope that hope that you won't take my information as gospel, as we used to say, and that you would do the research yourself, look into it yourself, and if it leads you, whichever direction it leads you, then so be it. But this is part of the reason why I am where I am, and my position is what it is. So I'll end with that. I'll say thank you. Take care. I will see you in 2 weeks. I don't have another anniversary coming up, and I don't have another birthday coming up. My birthday is tomorrow. But certainly we will talk, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. And feel free to leave me comments after you take a look at the video.